Eric von Däniken's hypothesis will have an increasing effect on society, science, literature, and art. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence is a concern that affects all of humanity.
For me, it's like souvenirs of the past. Some of our human forefathers had contact with extraterrestrials. They were here, they visited us, they were in contact. Something happened in the deep past, and it will happen again in the future.
The author of the sensational international bestseller and the most compelling non-fiction publication of all time is back in London for the first time in 25 years to celebrate Chariots of the Gods' 50th anniversary. Eric von Däniken Legacy Night. In this 2-hour special, you are invited to share with Eric his most influential discoveries and revelations. Learn about his incredible life journey as an author and researcher. Meet the team behind the highly anticipated Chariots of the Gods 360-degree entertainment franchise. Eric von Däniken Legacy Night, live streamed from the Princess Anne Theatre, BAFTA 195, Piccadilly, London, October 15th, 2016. For more information and to purchase tickets, please visit zoharstargate.com.
But before I actually go into the talk, I just want to share with you some extracts from 2 or 3 books that I've always held quite close to my heart. You may or may not have heard them before. The first one, a friend of mine who in his younger years was an explorer. And I was round his house one day talking to him, and he showed me this book written by an explorer. I don't know whether the pronunciation is correct, but I call him Roerich. It's R-O-E-R-I-C-H. And he wrote a book called Altai Himalaya. It was published around about 1930. And he was travelling through... He was crossing the Gobi Desert in Mongolia in 1926. And this is a part of an experience that his group had. And I will read this to you, bearing in mind it is 1926, and I will quote here. On August the 5th, something remarkable. We were in our camp in the Kukunoor district, not far from the Humboldt chain. In the morning, about 9:30, some of our caravaneers noticed a remarkably big black eagle flying above us. 7 of us began to watch this unusual bird. At the same moment, another of our caravaneers remarked, "There is something far above the bird." And he shouted in his astonishment. We all saw, in a direction from north to south, something big and shiny reflecting the sun, like a huge oval, moving at great speed. Crossing our camp, this thing changed in its direction from south to southwest, and we saw how it disappeared in the intense blue sky. We even had time to take our field glasses and saw quite distinctly an oval form with shiny surface, one side of which was brilliant from the sun. Now, one of my favourite UFO books is by Major Donald E. Keogh, written in published in 1954, called Flying Saucers from Outer Space. I think because it showed in that book the immense problems that seemed to face the United States Air Force at that time, when so many flying saucers were seen, and there seemed to be a never-ending progression of jets being sent up chasing these craft. Now, the United States Air Force press chief at that time was a man called Albert Chop. And Major Keogh was in his office, and again I quote, it says, after yet another rash of saucer sightings in 1952, two Chicago engineers theorised that they were pockets of ionised air caused by the recent A-bomb tests in Nevada, to which Albert Chop said to Major Kehoe, I wish to heaven it were right. We could stop scrambling all those jets, tell the public this was it, and close the project. But Air Technical Intelligence Centre had scientists look into that long ago, though they knew it wasn't the answer. We had sightings before the first A-bomb blast. No, it's just another wild idea by people who don't know the evidence. If they'd seen intelligence reports like these, they'd know better. And one more, which is by Sir David Brewster, and this was in his book called More Worlds Than One, which was published in 1854. And he says that universal life upon universal matter is an idea to which the mind instinctively clings. Kingdoms without kings and subjects, continents without cities, cities without citizens, houses without families, ships without crews, and railway trains without passengers are contingencies as probable as solar systems without planets or planets without inhabitants. Now, I personally believe that no sphere would come into being without a purpose. And that purpose is that at some point in its existence, it will establish life, consciousness and intelligence. And as Professor Fred Alan Wolf rightly stated, that consciousness is the universe's way of looking at and understanding itself. Now, when I was born in the East End of London in 1951. We lived in a tiny house, what they used to call 2 up and 2 down. We lived upstairs, my aunt lived downstairs. The toilet was out the back of the garden towards the end. It was called the backyard trot. And when I was 4 years old, I was standing in the living room talking to my mum. She passed away 2 years ago, but we often used to talk about this conversation. And I said to her, Mum, there's no such thing as death. She said, what do you mean, son? She said, when you die, you die. I said, no, you don't. I said, you take someone that's like buried in the ground. I said, the universe goes on forever, and you can't tell me that we never take a part in that universe again. It doesn't make sense. I said to her, we have to come back because it's the only way that we can evolve. I was trying to talk of reincarnation, but at 4 years old I didn't know the word reincarnation, but I did know that we were not just this life. In the same conversation, I said to her, also, Mum, you're not my real parents. And she was quite shocked at this. And she said, well, of course we are. You were born in this house. And I said, well, you are as far as bringing me here physically, but my real parents are in space. And in the same conversation, I said to her, I said, not in your lifetime, Mum, but in my lifetime, something of incredible importance is going to happen on this planet and will affect every life form upon it. And I think we are approaching that now. Now, from that point, I found it very difficult to relate to anybody. There was no one that I could talk to. I had a lot of knowledge in my head about space, about the space people, and there was no one I could talk to. I thought I was the only person in this world that knew this. Now, when I was 6 years old, we got our first television. Now, apart from Emergency Ward 10, which some of you will remember if you're as old as me, all that seemed to be on was cowboys and Indians. And all my mates played out in the street with their cowboys and Indian suits on, looking rather fine with their guns and holsters and their chaps, and the Indians with their feather headdresses. But I didn't want a cowboy suit or an Indian suit, I wanted a space suit. And we saw one advertised, and I said to Mum, this is what I want. And she sent away for it, and when it arrived I couldn't wait to put it on. And I put it on, and it had like this plastic head thing that it just sort of slotted over my head. It was rather long. And when I put it on, I can't tell you how wonderful I felt when I had this suit on. And I couldn't wait to run out into the street and show my friends. So I did that, and they all stood there and laughed. They found it quite odd that I wanted to be a spaceman, and I felt quite embarrassed, turned around and went back indoors, close to tears. And Mum said to me, well, look, we'll send it back and get you a cowboy suit. I said, no, I want a space suit. So I said, what I'll do, I'll just wear it indoors. And that could turn into something nasty, couldn't it? Really? But I'm quite safe, I think, in that area. But that's what I'd done. Now, I was a bit depressed. I didn't go back out and play again. So in the afternoon, I was reading my comic called Eagle, and I was reading the final chapter of a story about Dandere. I was sitting at the table. Mum had gone out to the toilet, which I said was at the end of the garden, on its own. And this story had been going for about 3 or 4 weeks. And he was like fighting, I think it was the Mekons, I'm sure it was. Am I right there, the Mekons? Yeah. Eh? The Trings, was it?
Mekon was the leader.
Mekon was the leader? Right. Well, I'm going to say Mekon because that's the word that always stays in my mind. So just ignore that. I'm going to say it was the Mekons. I like that name. So I was reading this. It was about the 4th chapter, and it was like the end of the story. And there was this great big battle of darkness over light. And Dandere won. And I was so incredibly excited, I was screaming at the top of my head. And I was saying, Mum, Mum, quick, Mum, come here, Mum, Mum, Mum. I just kept saying. And in a minute or so, Mum had come running up the stairs. She crashed through the door. She still had her knickers and skirt around near her knees. And she said, what on earth has happened? I said, Dandere's just beaten the Mekons. And she stood there and she said, I've just run up the garden like this. She said, don't ever, ever do that again. So it became very lonely. And I don't know about Adrian Mole, but I think somebody ought to write a book called The Growing Pains of a Young Ufologist. I tried once more when I was about 11 to try and make some sort of communication with somebody else. And I used to sit out watching the stars. I loved sitting out in the garden watching the stars. And I was always amazed that the plough, the Great Bear, looked like a giant saucepan. And I was sitting in science class, well, if you could call it science, I think the most we ever seemed to do was watch little mercury balls roll around on a little plate over a Bunsen burner. And I was doing that this particular day and I was thoroughly bored, so I thought, I'll try again. So I put my hand up, said, please sir. And the teacher said, yes, what do you want, Oram? So I said to him, do you know there's a great big saucepan up in the sky? And he said, you'll get a great big saucepan on your bloody head if you're not careful, lad. So that was the last time I tried to communicate with anybody, and life went on. I continued having experiences but couldn't talk to anyone about them. Now there will be a couple of experiences here I'm going to tell you which some people have heard before. I make no apologies about those two because they were important turning points in my life. We got the chance of moving out of this tiny house and we moved to Rainham in Essex, where we had a whole house to ourselves. And I got a job as a baker's roundsman delivering bread to houses. The company was Wonderloaf. And one morning I said to my mum, I'm going to see a flying saucer. Because by now I used to get feelings if something was going to happen. In later years I was actually told to go somewhere. So I said to my mum, I'm going to see a flying saucer. Now, she was quite used to me by then, and she said, we'll take a camera with you. And I said to her, no, this is silly. And this went on for almost 2 weeks. Every morning before I went to work, I told her I was going to see a flying saucer. And one particular morning, I used to arrive at a point which was a cul-de-sac. I delivered to the last house on the right-hand side, and facing me was a small park. And I used to stay there and have a sandwich and a flask of tea. I was sitting in my cab doing just that. It was still quite early in the morning, but the sky was a lovely blue. And I was just looking out the windscreen. And if I was like sitting where you are, over to the left started to come over this enormous cigar-shaped object. It was absolutely massive. We worked out eventually with Charles Bowen, who was then editor of Flying Saucer Review, that it was about 1 mile in length. It came across very majestic, quite slowly, and in total silence. It came across at an angle, stopped, turned around, so I was looking at it like this, and it seemed to like turn on its axis because the middle part seemed to go a bit wider and then went back again. And it just stopped there. It was a brilliant orange colour and it was like it was on fire. I jumped out of the van and stood in the middle of the road, and I had an half-eaten sandwich in this hand and a cup of tea in that hand, stood looking at this object. My head was like locked up looking at it. And I felt a part of my consciousness go into that object, but I was still aware of being in my body. It was a strange feeling. I was in both places. And there was some sort of conversation going on. Now at that point, the milkman used to come along, and he used to park his van nearly opposite mine, and he used to go into the park because there were public conveniences there. And as he went by, he said to me, "Morning, Baker," as he always did. And I thought, right, I've got a witness now. And I tried to tell him to look up in the sky, and I couldn't say anything. I tried to speak and I couldn't. And he walked in to the park to go to the toilet, and I thought, well, when he comes out, I'm going to try again, but if I still can't talk to him, he's got to wonder what I'm doing, standing in the middle of the road with my head locked up in the sky with a sandwich and a cup of tea. So if I can't talk to him, that must look a bit odd, and he will turn around to see what I'm looking at. He came out the toilet and he just walked straight past me with this, like, not a strange stare, but he didn't even look at me. He just walked straight past. And he got into his milk float, and I heard it turn around. It went to the end of the road, and I heard it go round the back of the houses, and then I started to come back into my body. And at that point, this space person in the craft said to me, "This is for you only." I came back and I was able to move again, and I was incredibly excited. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to tell someone. I had the Daily Mirror in the cab of the van. I rang them and told them about it, but could get no sense out of them at all. They just didn't want to know. I eventually started delivering the bread, and I went to 2 or 3 wrong houses. I eventually got to one which was the right house, and as this elderly lady answered the door, she said, "My goodness, Baker, you look like you've just seen a ghost." I said, "I haven't." I said, "I've just seen a flying saucer." I said, "It was incredible." She said, "Now you come indoors and make you a nice cup of tea." I said, "No, look, I've just seen this flying saucer." I said, "No, it's all right, Baker. You just come in and sit down and make you a nice cup of tea." I said, "Look, it was enormous." I said, "It took up the whole sky." I said, "A part of me went into it. They told me it was just for me and blah, blah, blah." And she said, "No, Baker, you're not driving that van in that condition. Sit down. I'll make you a nice cup of tea." I said, "Look, I've just seen this flying saucer." She said, "I'm going to ring your boss." I thought, oh my God. So she rang me boss and told him that I was not in a fit state to carry on delivering my bread. So he came out with a relief driver. By then I'd calmed down a bit, and I thought, well, the last thing I can do is tell him I've seen a flying saucer, because I'll probably get the sack. And he arrived and he said, "What's wrong?" And I said to him, "I don't feel very well." So he took me home, and I told Mum what I'd seen, and Mum said, "Why don't you go across and buy a newspaper?" And I don't know why I bought this particular newspaper. I just went over and grabbed one, and it was a Daily Express. We were looking through it, and we saw there was a science correspondent in there called Robert Chapman. She said, "Write to him." Now, by a strange coincidence, and there is a hell of a lot of coincidences in ufology, I wrote to him, and he had apparently just brought a book out at the time called UFO. And he wrote back to me and said that he had passed my letter on to Charles Bowen, who was then editor of Flying Saucer Review. I eventually went to see Charles Bowen, and an article came out in the 1970 issue, Flying Saucer Review. I think it was a June issue. But when that came out, 2 people found their way to my house and took me to Warminster. I didn't know what Warminster was at the time. And that was an enormous change in my life, because I went to Warminster. Furthest I'd ever been was Clacton up till then, so that was quite a journey in itself anyway. We went up Cradle Hill on the Saturday night, and there must have been 200 people up there. There were cars all the way down the hill. And I couldn't believe that there was all these people that knew about flying saucers and spacemen. And that's really when my life started to take a turn for the better, I suppose. I was able to communicate with other people, but the experiences actually picked up, and I got inundated with experiences. Now, I'd just had, which I'm not going to go through now because it's too long to explain, but I had a whole week of UFO sightings in Warminster. I went there for a week's holiday, and they came nearly every night. They answered our talks. They told us to go there. The car was affected. It had to be dumped in the end. It was an incredible week. And at the end of the week, when I came home, Mum and Dad were still up watching telly. It was about 11:30. And I sat down and told him about this incredible week that I just had. It was a very difficult thing, you know, to go and have these experiences and then come back into a mundane life. But I told him about this experience, and my dad just laughed. My dad was incredibly down to earth. There was no one more down to earth than my dad. And he didn't believe any of it. I was more spiritually in tune with my mother, and she was my saviour, I suppose, when I was younger. Now, I was quite annoyed at my dad keep laughing at my experiences and not taking them serious. So I sat in meditation on and off for 2 weeks. There was more people around there. Let's see you. Shall I move over a bit? Are you okay there? Yeah. I sat in meditation on and off for 2 weeks, asking the space people to come down and let my dad see them. So I felt he needed this to happen. He didn't, but I did. And after 2 weeks of meditation, at the time I was working at the Ford Motor Company, and I was on a 3-shift system. This particular week I was on night work, and that was like from 10 o'clock till 6 in the morning. I used to go to bed in the afternoon about 3 o'clock. Mum used to wake me up about 9. I'd have something quickly to eat and I'd leave about 9:30. This particular night it was 10 to 8, and I was woken, which I'd got quite used to by now, which I can only call a voice impression. It's not an audible voice like someone speaking in my ear. It's something I hear in my mind. I suppose it's telepathy. And the voice said to me, "Go and look out of your parents' bedroom window." So I got straight out of bed, went straight in there, and hovering over the top of the house was this enormous silver globe, and I can tell you it was absolutely stunning. It was like it was alive. It was like spitting silver. I went downstairs. Dad was in his normal posture, half asleep in the armchair with a telly on, and I said to Dad, "Would you like to see one of these flying saucers, Dad?" So he said, "Yeah, I wouldn't mind, son." Bit tongue-in-cheek. So I said to him, "We'll go and open the front door and have a look." So he opened the front door, and you've never seen anybody change so quickly in your life. I mean, my dad never got excited. He opened the front door and looked up and saw this object hovering over the house, and he said, "Quick, quick, go and get the binoculars." I went and got the binoculars, and he stood there looking up at it, and it stayed for about 2 minutes. And I remember standing there looking at it, and I thought, this is staying still for quite a while. And this voice came back and said to me, "If we go too soon, your dad will go back indoors and eventually poo-poo the old..." I didn't say poo-poo, that's my language. Poo-poo the whole idea. He would try and find an excuse for it. They said, by us staying for quite a while, he will fully take into his consciousness what he is seeing. And after 2 minutes, it started to move across the road, went over the house opposite, so we lost sight of it. So my dad, which again was incredible to see, I didn't know he could move so fast. He moved fast once when he found a 10-bob note on the floor at Southend. He was down and up before I knew what had happened. So, I mean, he did have it in him. But he said, "Quick, upstairs!" And he flew upstairs like a man possessed. I tried to follow him. He dived into the bedroom. We ran across. He practically ripped the curtains off of the curtain rail, flung open the window, and we stood there watching this object slowly going away. And it stopped. It seemed to stop over the River Thames, which was about 3/4 of a mile away. It stayed there for a few seconds. It then moved to the left and stopped and a few seconds later it just shot off at the most incredible speed out of sight. You could hardly follow it. Now my dad never laughed again about UFOs, and life went on. Now in 1972 I was going out with this girl called Eileen, and she absolutely hated my interest in flying saucers. And I couldn't work out whether it was because she might have been jealous of all the media attention I got. I used to be in the newspapers in those days and on the radio. Or she was just totally fed up because it's all I talked about. But one day, the London Evening News came round to my house after hearing me give a talk on radio. And they came round for an interview. And we had a talk. I told them about my experiences. And then at the end of the talk, they took some photos and they said to me, "Have you got a girlfriend or anything?" And I thought, now this could work here, this could help my relationship. Perhaps if she gets involved, perhaps if she gets her photo in the paper, perhaps that's what she wants. Perhaps she wants some attention. So I thought, what a brilliant idea. So I said, yeah, I have actually. And they said, well, what did she think about it? And I said, well, not much. I said, she doesn't like me talking about it. I said, she told me to stop talking about UFOs, and I did, and I couldn't find anything else to talk about. So they said to me, can we go and see her? So I said, yeah, do. Told them where it was, and they went round that afternoon. Well, I was going to see her that evening to go out for a couple of pints. I went round, knocked at the door, and I was so excited because I had this vision that she was going to open the door and say, "Oh, Mike, my beloved," and sort of grab hold of me and say, "Thank you." Well, she opened the door and there was these steely eyes staring at me. And whenever I saw them, I knew I was in trouble. And she just stood and stared for a couple of seconds, and then she said to me, "Don't ever send reporters around my house again." I thought, oh, blimey, I've done it again. I said, oh, okay. We went out for a drink, and it wasn't a very good evening. But we carried on, and then about 2 or 3 days later, I went round to pick her up, again to go out for a drink. Perhaps that's why I saw so many UFOs. I was going for a drink. Went round, she got in the car. We drove to the pub, parked in the car park, and she wouldn't get out the car. Now, I'd experienced this before, and it was normally because she was really peed off about something that I'd done. And she just stared out the windscreen, and she wouldn't say anything. And I knew she would, it was just a matter of time. So I sat there and didn't say anything. She didn't look at me, she just stared out the windscreen. And she said to me, "I was coming home from work this evening, and I got on the bus, and I was sitting on the bus, and this man got on the bus and sat down in the seat in front of me." And she said, he opened the London Evening News. I thought, oh dear. And she said, I saw these great big headlines which said, UFOs put Eileen out of focus. And she said, and here it is. And she slammed it in my lap so hard I thought my surname was Bobbitt. Now, for posterity, I sealed it in plastic from 1972. I look young there, didn't I? I'll just read you the first bit. because these are the two bits that annoyed her. It says, Michael Oram has given up seeing his girlfriend for 2 nights a week to track down his other love, flying saucers. That didn't go down too well. And at the end, it says, his girlfriend Eileen Connors, also aged 21, does not share his enthusiasm. She said, when I first met Michael, I thought he was mad. All he did was talk about flying saucers. He kept on about them. In the end, I told him to shut up. He did, and couldn't find anything else to talk about. Now, let's turn that. Right, so I thought it worked for me dad, it can work for her. So I sat in meditation and I said to him, look, I really need this one to work, even more than my dad. I need Eileen to see you. So I said, how about it? About 10 days later, I was taking my mum and dad to see my sister and her family in Harlow in Essex. It's about 23 miles away. Now for about 17 of those miles I used to take all the shortcuts through these tiny little country lanes, very windy, very dark. And Eileen, which was a bit surprising, decided to come with us. I was surprised when she said, can I come with you? So I said, yeah, okay. So she did. Now, coming home that night, we were coming down the main road to the point where we had to turn in to start going down these 17 miles of dark country lanes. I was in the front driving, with my dad was in the front with me. My mum and Eileen were in the back. We'd been going down this dark lane for about 7 to 8 miles when my dad suddenly said, there's this light that's following our car. I said, nah, it's probably a star, Dad. Carried on driving. He said, I've been watching it, he said, for about the last 5 miles. It's following our car. So I was driving along and trying to bend down to look, and I couldn't really see properly. I said, no, it can't be, Dad, you sure? He said, I've been watching it. He said, it's following our car. He said, every time we go round a bend, that's going round the bend. It's following us and keeping the same distance all the time. And then this little voice in the back of the car said, I saw it as well. And I thought, did I hear something then? So I said, what was that? She said, it's true. I've been watching it. She said, I didn't want to say anything. She said, as soon as we turned down this dark lane, that's when it first appeared. But I tried to tell myself it wasn't really there, but it is there. So I thought, blimey Nick, this is incredible. We drove on for about half a mile until I could find somewhere to stop. Pulled in this tiny little lay. Well, it wasn't really a lay-by, but you could actually just pull in off the road a bit. Very few cars went down these lanes anyway. I didn't want to get my whole family wiped out in one go in case a car was coming down. And we all got out the car, and this light had now stopped. And it was just hovering in the field. It was silver glow, and it didn't do nothing, it just stayed there. We stayed there for about 5 minutes watching, and nothing would happen that we are aware of. And then it suddenly just shot off at incredible speed. It was quite close to us. No noise or anything. Shot off at an incredible speed. Now, that was marvellous in itself. But what was even better was that the next night, when I went round to see Eileen, she said, can I have one of your UFO sighting forms? I want to fill it in. So this was an incredible change round. Our relationship still ended some months later, but this was still quite an achievement. And just while I mention, I'm just putting this little bit in here. I was talking to my dad about 3 weeks ago. Now he's 84 now. Since Mum died, he's gone downhill very quickly. He's in a walking frame, but he has home care. He doesn't want to leave his home, but his mind is deteriorating, his memory's going. He forgets quite a lot now what you tell him. I rang him up 3 or 4 weeks ago to see how he was. He goes over the Old People's Centre every Tuesday. And I said to him before, what's it like over there? He said, oh, it's boring, like, you know, everyone's just sitting around, no one's sort of saying anything. Anyway, he said to me, I said, all right, Dad, all right. He said, yeah. He said, I went over to this centre, he said, this week. He said, and this man came in and gave us a lecture on UFOs. I thought, wow, he's imagining this. I couldn't imagine someone going to this elderly senior citizen centre or something giving a talk on UFOs. I just couldn't imagine all these old biddies that would be interested in flying saucers. I said, Dad, you sure, Dad? You sure this man came? He said, yeah, he came and gave us a talk on UFOs. So I said, well, what did you do? He said, well, at the end of the talk, he said, the chap said, has anybody seen any UFOs? He said, and I put my hand up and said, yeah, I have. He said, and I told him about that one that we saw that followed the car. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is the important thing was, I said, what, do you remember that then, Dad? Because he doesn't remember anything now. He said, yeah. I said, tell me about it. And he told me every single detail of what happened. And I found that a little bit emotional, that he could remember that in every detail. Now, move on a bit. I moved to Warminster. Eventually took the decision. I gave up a good job. I was an export manager at electronic component manufacturers at the time. But I gave that job up and moved to Warminster in 1977 and spent 6 to 7 incredible, and I mean incredible, years living there and experiencing UFOs and their occupants. Now, in 1983, I had 3 transitional experiences. I call them transitional experiences, which is like the passage from one place or state to another. I'm not happy with the word abduction, and I think that needs to be carefully looked into anyway. I think a lot of people that feel they've been abducted, if they could perhaps contact their higher self, it might not be an abduction, because I feel that there could well be permission given at a higher level, and we may be just distorting what is happening when we come back through our lower mind, and that does need careful investigation. I call them transitional experiences, and in 1983 I had 3 in round about 2 months. I was taken up on a beam of light, and on each of these visits I stayed with one particular being. There was other space people around. She was a female, and she was dressed in a green, tight-fitting green suit. Reminded me rather of like the ski suits, but it's not as baggy, it's much more tight-fitting. I could see no zips or buttons or anything like that, and it was almost, I remember standing there and looking at this and thinking that she must have put it on by thought, because I couldn't see how she'd got into it. Now, she had a belt and a buckle, an oblong buckle on her belt, and she said to me that if that buckle was removed, she would cease to be. Now, at the time, I sensed that it controlled some sort of environment in her suit. I did have another theory later on in life when I came to know them a lot more and found that there was a lot more light to their body than what there is to their physical body. And I did sometimes wonder if they could actually put on a form, because it would be easier for us to recognise, and that buckle may well have provided this form. whether in some sort of image or an actual physical or etheric body. I don't know, but I like to look at things from all angles. Now, she said to me that I no longer needed to see them physically anymore. She said it would serve no more purpose. She said what I had to do now was use my mind. She said I had to meet them halfway. I had to make some sort of effort to reach up to them, because they cannot just come down here and sort all our problems out for us. It would not be allowed anyway, and we would not evolve. She said that they are more mind than body, and us at our point in evolution are more body than mind, and we have to raise the quality of our being. We have to raise the quality of our thoughts, our actions. We have to raise the quality of our heart centre. We have to raise our vibrations, our frequencies. And we have to try and reconnect to our divine inner self. She said that we shut this out a long, long while ago, but it was now time to reconnect. She said that we no longer feel no longer feel worthy. She said if you knew who you were, meaning all of us, then we would probably make much more spiritual progress. She said you are not just 70 She said you are all old souls. She said you came here a long, long while ago, hundreds of thousands of years ago, in a three-dimensional world, moving through different levels of awareness and consciousness, different dimensions, even before you became human. That she said that you are at a point now where doorways can open. She said these doorways have happened in the past. It is no new thing. But there comes a time when opportunities arise. And now she had a sense of humour, because she said to me, there may be a lot of unemployment on this planet, but there's wonderful job opportunities out there. She said that these doorways, when they happen, we have to grab at these opportunities. She said there are too many people on this planet now that are ready to move forward, and there are too many people on this planet that are holding us back. She said everything is about the evolution of consciousness. As I said earlier, consciousness is the universe's way of knowing and understanding itself. Everything is the evolution of consciousness. Now people today, many people today, are now having memories of their origin. And that is, yes, they have been here for a long, long while, but it was not their place of origin. And this is what I was trying to tell my mum when I was 4 years old. My real parents are out in space. What I meant by that is that my origin was somewhere else than this earth. Now, you may think I'm a bit naive, but I'm not naive. I do try and look at all aspects of ufology. And I just want to talk a bit about the negative side. Now, I believe in universal life. Life is everywhere. But I'm sure that every race that moves through space or other dimensions or whatever will not all be that the high spiritual evolution that these people are that I meet. When I'm with them, there is a sense of incredible love, a universal love. And it's difficult to come back. But I'm sure that there must be other races that have the technology to move through space but lack the spiritual dimensions, very similar to what we have on this earth. And that is a technology that has outstripped spirituality. There's so much talk today of aliens that are supposed to be coming here, doing deals with the secret government, giving us technology for the exchange of a few animal mutilations, taking a few humans, having a few underground bases. Now, I don't know how much of this is true. Some of it could be true, none of it could be true, or it could all be true, but I've never come across these people. But I think that there are people on this earth, they're human in origin, at least that, and they do have a lot of darkness. They control through fear and insecurity. They lust for power, greed and controlling man through finance, etc. Now, like attracts like, we all know that. Negativity draws negativity, and darkness will breed darkness. But darkness is no match against the forces of light. And darkness will always be in the minority. Because of its very nature, darkness will always, in the end, destroy itself. You can protect yourself against this, even without spiritual knowledge, by covering yourself in light. No darkness can get through. Yes, you could still be shot, or you could have your house taken away, you could still be affected physically, but your mind would be your mind, and you would be secure from psychic attack if that was ever the case. I read about 5 years ago that when technology comes onto the marketplace, it is already about 20 years out of date. Now, if that's the case, and when you think how fast technology moves, it makes you wonder what our governments or secret governments, whoever they are, what they have in their possession. And if you take just one thing, lasers, when you think today when they're used in medical experiments, the incredible things that lasers can do, and the other extreme is that they are vast destructive beams of power. Now, who knows what laser technology they do have in their control, and they would be quite capable of doing these animal mutilations, not aliens but humans. They could do these mutilations and still take the so-called organs for genetic experiments or whatever. And by leaving the animal in situ, it would create fear and insecurity in us. Because one thing they would not want is for us to fraternise with these higher spiritual beings. Because they have everything to lose and we have everything to gain. If aliens are doing these mutilations, Why would they leave the animal in situ when they would have the technology to dispose of the carcass? Perhaps it's because they just couldn't care less what we think. I don't know. I'm just throwing these things open to you because I never experience anything negative. But they will try and stop fraternisation. Our expanded awareness, because this is what it's all about, and this is what she told me is what we must do. We have to raise the quality of our being. Now today I never had any idea what Roger, our last speaker, was going to talk about. But what he said is very, very true, and this is the essence of ufology. Expanded awareness will enable us to see the choices that are available. We need to move into a new dimension of awareness. And when we learn to become connected to our higher selves, we can then make our own connections at universal level. And that is important. Our mind can expand to the point where we can tune in to that same source that these spiritual beings or teachers receive their information. Now I'm sure someone could correct me here. I think it was Betty Andreasen, but I might be wrong, but it doesn't matter because it was the essence of what I'm about to say. And that is that when she was taken onto a spacecraft, there was a star map on the wall, and there was a space being standing with her, and she pointed and said, "Where are you?" And the space person said to her, "Show me where you are." And she said, "I don't know where I am." And he said, "Well, if you don't know where you are, what is the point of me showing you where I am?" Now, the point in that is for us, we must know and understand ourselves before we can hope to know and understand these higher spiritual beings. We have to reconnect with our divine inner self. For the very least, our own, as Roger said, salvation. And I'd just like to finish by saying that we have seen how we can destroy a planet, but now let's see how we can create one. Thank you very much.
Eric von Däniken's hypothesis will have an increasing effect on society, science, literature, and art. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence is a concern that affects all of humanity.
For me, it's like souvenirs of the past. Some of our human forefathers had contact with extraterrestrials. They were here, they visited us, they were in contact. Something happened in the deep past, and it will happen again in the future.
The author of the sensational international bestseller and the most compelling non-fiction publication of all time is back in London for the first time in 25 years to celebrate Chariots of the Gods' 50th anniversary. Eric von Däniken Legacy Night. In this 2-hour special, you are invited to share with Eric his most influential discoveries and revelations. Learn about his incredible life journey as an author and researcher. Meet the team behind the highly anticipated Chariots of the Gods 360-degree entertainment franchise. Eric von Däniken Legacy Night, live streamed from the Princess Anne Theatre, BAFTA 195, Piccadilly, London, October 15th, 2016. For more information and to purchase tickets, please visit zoharstargate.com.
the same moment, another of our caravaneers remarked, "There is something far above the bird," and he shouted in his astonishment. We all saw, in a direction from north to south, something big and shiny reflecting the sun, like a huge oval moving at great speed. Crossing our camp, this thing changed in its direction from south to southwest, and we saw how it disappeared in the intense blue sky. We even had time to take our field glasses and saw quite distinctly an oval form with shiny surface, one side of which was brilliant from the sun. Now, one of my favourite UFO books is by Major Donald E. Keogh, published in 1954, called Flying Saucers from Outer Space. I think because it showed in that book the immense problems that seemed to face the United States Air Force at that time, when so many flying saucers were seen and there seemed to be a never-ending progression of jets being sent up chasing these craft. Now, the United States Air Force press chief at that time was a man called Albert Chopp. And Major Keogh was in his office, and again I quote, it says, "After yet another rash of saucer sightings in 1952, solar systems without planets, or planets without inhabitants." Now, I personally believe that no sphere would come into being without a purpose. And that purpose is that at some point in its existence, it will establish life, consciousness and intelligence. And as Professor Fred Alan Wolf rightly stated, that consciousness is the universe's way of looking at and understanding itself. Now, when I was born in the East End of London in 1951. We lived in a tiny house, what they used to call 2 up and 2 down. We lived upstairs, my aunt lived downstairs. The toilet was out the back of the garden towards the end. It was called the backyard trot. And when I was 4 years old, I was standing in the living room talking to my mum. She passed away 2 years ago, but we often used to talk about this conversation. And I said to her, "Mum, there's no such thing as death." She said, "What do you mean, son?" She said, "When you die, you die." I said, "No, you don't." I said, "You take someone that's like buried in the ground." I said, "The universe goes on forever, and you can't tell me that we never take a part in that universe again. It doesn't make sense." I said to her, "We have to come back."
Eric von Däniken's hypothesis will have an increasing effect on society, science, literature, and art. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence is a concern that affects all of humanity.
For me, it's like souvenirs of the past. Some of our human forefathers had contact with extraterrestrials. They were here, they visited us, they were in contact. Something happened in the deep past, and it will happen again in the future.
The author of the sensational international bestseller and the most compelling non-fiction publication of all time is back in London for the first time in 25 years to celebrate Chariots of the Gods' 50th anniversary. Eric von Däniken Legacy Night. In this 2-hour special, you are invited to share with Eric his most influential discoveries and revelations. Learn about his incredible life journey as an author and researcher. Meet the team behind the highly anticipated Chariots of the Gods 360-degree entertainment franchise. Eric Von Däniken Legacy Night. Live streamed from the Princess Anne Theatre, BAFTA 195, Piccadilly, London, October 15th, 2016. For more information and to purchase tickets, please visit zoharstargate.com.
But before I actually go into the talk, I just want to share with you some extracts from 2 or 3 books that I've always held quite close to my heart. You may or may not have heard them before. The first one, a friend of mine who in his younger years was an explorer. And I was round his house one day talking to him, and he showed me this book written by an explorer. I don't know whether the pronunciation is correct, but I call him Roerich. It's R-O-E-R-I-C-H. And he wrote a book called Altai Himalaya. It was published around about 1930. And he was travelling through, he was crossing the Gobi Desert in Mongolia in 1926. And this is a part of an experience that his group had. And I will read this to you, bearing in mind it is 1926. And I will quote here. On August the 5th, something remarkable. We were in our camp in the Kukunoor district, not far from the Humboldt chain. In the morning, about 9:30, some of our caravaneers noticed a remarkably big black eagle flying above us. 7 of us began to watch this unusual bird. 2 Chicago engineers theorized that they were pockets of ionized air caused by the recent A-bomb tests in Nevada, to which Albert Chott said to Major Kehoe, "I wish to heaven it were right. We could stop scrambling all those jets, tell the public this was it, and close the project. But Air Technical Intelligence Center had scientists look into that long ago, though they knew it wasn't the answer. We had sightings before the first A-bomb blast. No, it's just another wild idea by people who don't know the evidence. If they'd seen intelligence reports like these, they'd know better." And one more, which is by Sir David Brewster, and this was in his book called More Worlds Than One, which was published in 1854. And he says that universal life upon universal matter is an idea to which the mind instinctively clings. Kingdoms without kings and subjects, continents without cities, cities without citizens, houses without families, ships without crews, and railway trains without passengers are contingencies as probable as